Well, welcome everybody to the final talk of the Southwest Wing Summer Festival. I'd very much like to welcome Donna Hadley, who fittingly is going to talk about perhaps the most exciting species that inhabits this region. Dan is a founding member and president of the Northern Jaguar Project, which is a binational non-profit dedicated to preserving the northernmost breeding population of jaguars on the continent. Currently, she assists the project in management of the 58,000-acre Northern Jaguar Reserve, which provides a safe haven for jaguars and other wildlife in a part of the Sierra Madre foothills in Sonora, Mexico, just a mere 120 miles south of the international boundary. We all know of the jaguar. It's renowned for its power, strength, beauty, and grace, and once it roamed much across the southern United States. But today, they're vanishing, sadly, and are nowhere more threatened than in this area here, vulnerable and threatened. So they've been removed from their historic northern range by poaching, habitat fragmentation, and all but disappeared. But luckily, there is some help at hand, and the illustrated talk that we're going to hear from Diana will show us a little bit about the hope there is, the work that's being done to protect this fabulous species, these vulnerable populations, work through environmental education and through agreements with cattle ranchers. So, over to you, Dan.
Thank you all for staying. So we can do this really interactively. Anytime you've got a question, just go ahead and ask it with your hand up, and we'll try to do a more collegial kind of discussion of jaguar. I'm going to really focus on jaguars that have been in the United States and the history of the ones that we know about here. How many of you have heard about El Jefe? Isn't that wonderful news?
Yes.
Wow. Really, really exciting. So we've got, you guys are a really good audience if you know about El Jefe returning after all that time. And in such a distant place, it's just really exciting. So I'll go ahead and start talking. And I got involved with this project. Carlos Lopez Gutierrez came to visit one day and said, we have this ranch that's for sale that has jaguars on it in Sonora. And do you know anybody who might be interested in buying it? And my husband, my late husband, was the science editor for the Whole Earth Catalog, which some of you guys look old enough to remember. Anyway, he knew lots of donors in California, and we thought, you know, we can do that. We can put together a team of people, and we can create a Jaguar Reserve. So it's a 10,000-acre ranch on top of a mountain, north of a little village called Javelinas in Sonora. $200,000. Wow. I mean, that was like, you know, that's a you can't even buy a house in my neighborhood in Menlo Park, Tucson anymore for that. Anyway, it was a great investment, and so we've been growing the reserve every year that we can. I think it's really important to know that conservation in Mexico is way less expensive than it is in the United States, and people are much more agreeable to it. We now have, let's see, we have 116,000 acres of neighboring ranchers. We don't own any of this property. We have a Mexican nonprofit that holds the title to the 58,000 acres that is the core reserve, but then we have really more than almost 3 times that amount of land in the Viviendo con Felinos project, which is working ranches that have cattle on them, and they are our allies, and they completely surround the reserve, and I'll show you a map of that. And so if you've got conservation dollars to spend, Mexico is a great place to do it. Because can you imagine going to a typical cattle rancher, and I was a cattle rancher for years, it's still my kids are running a couple of ranches. But the atmosphere among ranchers is really politicized, and that has not happened at all in Mexico. And so you go to somebody and say, look, we want to put cameras out on your property, and we want to see how many of the 4 existing predators you have on your ranch. Well, let me think about that. You know, maybe we can do it, and then we get these responses that come back from the ranchers saying, you know, that really helped me because now I know where all the mountain lions are from your cameras, so I'm moving my cows to a different part of the ranch. You know, I mean, that would not happen here.
They want to kill it.
Yeah. So political attitudes really are so important in the whole conservation movement. And I must say that I would much rather work in Mexico than I would in this country.
Yeah.
Because of the politicization, which is so tragic because, anyway, you'll hear some of the other responses from them. So that's my introduction. I thought that we were gonna buy this one 10,000 acre piece of property and then we would both be done with it. That was back in 2003, and it's gonna be 20 years next year, and I'm still at it. Okay, so here's Tucson, here's Douglas right over here. You drive all the way to Sahuaripa on a highway paved, and that takes about 5 hours. And then you drive up to the reserve on an unpaved road, and that takes about 5 hours. Okay, this will give you an idea of the reserve, which is, this is the property that is title to Asociación Conservación del Norte, which is a Mexican nonprofit that we manage. And these are all of the ranches that are our allied ranches. Here are different ones, different sizes. This guy here is really important. It's the only kind of like big, fancy ranch. Well, you'll see the houses. Okay, these are the kind of titles we get, and sometimes they have not been surveyed since those titles were written.
Wow.
Which really makes a huge problem. Plus, the surveyors don't like to go out there and go through all that brush and set their stakes and their points and stuff. So getting a piece of property is complicated. Okay, so we have all these natural protections. This is the Baviste River. This is the Aros River, which is the largest undammed river in northern Mexico, and it does have a couple of terrible mines on it, but the river is undammed, and it's really a beautiful, beautiful river. And they come together right here at the Tres Corrientes point, and this becomes the Rio Yohoko, which is the biggest river in Sonora. Okay, this is what the terrain looks like. Here's the road that comes up to the reserve. The first time I went down there, I went with my next door neighbor who's a book dealer, and he's an intrepid camper. He's not afraid to get outside. 30 miles, we thought, well, that's like, we'll drive up there in an hour. Anyway, it started getting dark, and we just quit driving, sat down, and we looked out over this view, and we saw not one single electric light anywhere, and we counted, I'm trying to remember, I think it was 12 or 14 mountain ranges that we could actually see as the sun was going down. And so we just ate our sandwiches and got in our sleeping bags and went on the next day for another few hours. Okay, here's the road, and you can see why. This is what it is. our road. But that was 6 months without, with only going up there on mules. Okay, you can get access sometimes much easier from the rivers, and this is the Narrows, and it's really, there are beaches all along it. These are cow tracks here, but I'm going to show you some other tracks. The thing that makes this a really interesting area is the different elevation changes and the numbers of biotic communities that you get in those elevation changes, and especially in the little canyons that are really well watered, but you have just a really remarkable biodiversity. So Sinaloa and thorn scrub is in the lower elevations, and then you've got the tropical dry forest, and then at the highest elevations, which are about 400 to 500 feet, you have lake woodland. And all of them have canyons with all kinds of different confusing things in each canyon. Okay, so there are these palm canyons are really beautiful when there's plenty of water. And my cell phone tells me that it's raining in Sahuaripa every day, but since it's been telling me that about Tucson too, I don't really believe it anymore. So here we've got non-cow tracks, and these are, you see, otters, neotropical river otters, and all kinds of shorebirds. The thing that's interesting about this area is the historic. To me, I'm an environmental historian, and so when I see something like these stone fences, I just really love seeing that. And they were built, a lot of them, in the 18th century. So this has been an area. Think about before barbed wire. The only way to keep your cattle in was either with ocotillos, saguaro ribs, cut branches, or stones. And the stone fencing in some parts of Sonora is truly amazing. Okay, this is a typical Cowboys house. And a lot of the ranchers who own the surrounding properties live either in the town of Sahuaripa, and some of them actually live in Hermosillo. And they come up to move cattle and make decisions for the calving season or for when they're going to sell their calves. And this is the way you have to get your cows to town. So it's on that incredible road. So it's not a very profitable place to run a ranch. And not very many people are willing to live like this and cook outside. So, you know, it's kind of like, it's really like camping. And many of the old cowboys, and we have the same problem in Arizona, because the second and third and fourth generations of ranch kids don't want to stay on the ranch. You know, they think it's too boring to be out there by themselves, and they really want to have a job in town. No quiero trabajar afuera. I don't want to work outside. You know, you hear that all the time.
Do you have any idea? I see it says quality cattle. Do you have any idea what breed it is?
These are they have wonderful mixes, and what they call them there is Corriente, but that is really the Criollo breed. That was the type of cattle that was brought from Spain, you know, in the 17th, 16th, and 17th centuries, and they're skinnier, hardier. The meat is tougher. They don't fatten up like the English breeds. And now what most of the ranchers in Sonora are doing is they're mixing the Corriente cattle or the Criollo cattle with other breeds, and they do Simmental and Charolais. These white guys here probably have some Brahma in them, and they probably have some Charolais. It used to be that Arizona just had Herefords. You know, 50 years ago, everybody had Herefords. Now everybody has got black cattle, you know, that's Angus of some kind. And those are fatter breeds that can't walk as far. They can't scramble. These guys can scramble up the hills. I mean, ecologically, it's a better type of cattle to have because they move around more. They can go 3 days without much water, and they're really agile. It makes a huge difference. This is a typical rancher house. This is another typical rancher house. The problems for these ranchers include drought. I mean, this was really bad year. Unstable cattle markets and access to sales, and predation is minor compared to the other problems that they've got. So anyway, we started doing research down there, and we got the local ranchers kind of involved in helping us with some of the research projects. And we have a ranch manager who has a master's degree from the University of Querétaro, and he is an expert on ocelots, and we've got lots of ocelots down there. And this is Carmina Gutierrez, who's, oh, well, there she is again. Okay, this is Carmina smiling at us, and she is the person who did all of the research on all of the photographs that were submitted for the Borderlands, the Borderland Linkages Initiative, which is run by the Northern Jaguar Project and Wildlands Network, and all these different organizations working in different parts of Sonora submit all the photographs to Carmina, and Carmina sits in the office and goes through all of them and figure out. She's the one who got the identification on El Jefe, that this was the El Jefe from the Santa Rita Mountains, now 200 miles south in Sonora somewhere. So that was just a really exciting discovery. Anyway, we set up these motion trigger, I think you all probably know all about motion trigger cameras, but we try to do two sides of a wash so that when the animal goes down, especially if it's a spotted cat, you can match up the spot patterns, because on ocelots and jaguars, they're all completely unique. We have a good time barbecuing. So this is our research station over here. Oh, no. Okay, more good times. Researchers at work. And anyway, all the photographs come back with the date and the time, and we can really get a lot of information without doing any kind of invasive research. We don't put out any kind of scent attractants, and most researchers do that. And we also don't do any kind of trapping of any kind. There's one of the cameras, and that's Miguel Gomez, the one I was telling you, is the ocelot specialist. Okay, tracks. Hard to tell. It's very hard for me to tell what's a jaguar and what's a mountain lion. But the jaguar tracks press down more on this part of the foot, and they're rounder, and they're slightly bigger unless it's a really huge mountain lion. Okay, so here we've got, this really shows you how to identify a jaguar, because those patterns are the same. This guy's Zapatos. Zapatos went from the Jaguar Reserve over to a reserve. You know where Madera, Chihuahua is? Anyway, it's about this same was it latitude or longitude? Anyway, it's due east of the Jaguar Reserve, but it's in Chihuahua, so it had crossed like 2 or 3 mountain ranges before you got
Incredibly
over.
rugged country too.
It's really rugged. Anyhow, he went over there and spent a couple of years, and then he came back, and he was the one that we thought had traveled the farthest, and we were really impressed that this guy Zapatos had gone so far. And then here comes El Jefe, who's like outwalked him by miles.
But you know,
Okay, so these are the 4 felines that we signed the Viviendo con Felinos members of the surrounding ranches with. And we give rewards in many different ways. We give monetary rewards that are like 5,000 pesos for a jaguar, 1,500 for an ocelot, 1,000 pesos for a mountain lion, and 500 for a bobcat. So, and people are interested in getting that amount of money. It makes a big difference to a lot of the small income ranchers. But then we also do other things. We've done a whole bunch of restoration projects, and we started putting in gabions, most of which blew out. And so we tried to find other ways to do the gabions, and we sent some of our personnel to special classes in, like how you construct what they call a media luna, or a basket gabion, or whether you want to just like bury big rocks in the creek and slow the flow down. I mean, there are all different kinds of ways of making the water either sink into the ground more and stay put, not rush off down a chute straight. You don't want to turn your creek beds into irrigation canals, which is what this country has been doing for years. Anyway, we've learned a lot about the restoration projects that we've done, and we're doing much better work on the restoration than when we
Are
started
those
out.
cruisers, that concerns about water, they know how to use stepping stones to go across that little bit of water there?
Yeah,
Are the Jaguars the same way? I thought they just.
no, that's really interesting. You saw that mountain lion only walking on the rocks. Jaguars swim, and they swim for fun. And they're the only cat that does that. And you've probably seen some of those films that come from the Pantanal of the Jaguars jumping in and grabbing a caiman. Well, there's this famous photographer, his name is Gregory Colbert, and he just does wildlife photography, and his photographs are just so stunning. He has these two Eritrean models. They're a young woman and a young man. And the Eritreans are the Africans from East Africa who have those incredible, beautiful long necks, and they're really graceful, skinny, very, very black people. They're just gorgeous. And so he got these Eritrean models to swim in a pond with jaguars, and he had underwater cameras and there are photographs, but they are absolutely stunning. And supposedly the jaguars don't bother human beings when they're all swimming together, so.
Jump in the water.
Yeah, jump in the water and swim with the police. Anyway, these are some of our members of the group. And this lady over here on the left actually lives on, her husband died, and she stayed up there on the ranch. No telephone, no electricity, no nothing, no, I don't know whether she's even got a truck, but that's where she lives, and she's real happy about it. So anyway, these are some of our prices that we pay. There's the ocelot. And for each photograph, yeah. And so when we first started out, there was a little bit of resistance to this project. And so somebody said, well, how do I know that you aren't like, maybe there were 5 jaguars instead of just 1? And how come, how do I trust you? You come with us the next time we go to get the film out of the camera. Okay, yeah, so they go, most of the time they go with us, but sometimes they don't. Anyway, when we first started out, we had, we signed contracts with these ranchers every year. We have a big fiesta in town, and there's a big contest for who had the best photograph on their ranch. And sometimes it'll be like, my favorite one was this skunk spraying a fox, and and so that wins an extra prize. And so the prizes are things like a water tank, a water storage tank, those black tanks that you put on your roof, or a roll of pipe, or drainage stuff, or cattle feeders, or we give something practical. But then we also do these donations, these monetary donations. So anyhow, we in the contracts, we didn't have anything about how many of the same animal could be photographed that you would get paid for in, on that single day. So what we had was an ocelot that was chasing or playing with like a mouse or some little critter or bull, I don't know what it was. And this ocelot was running back and forth and back and forth. So we had like 15 photographs of the same ocelot really playing with this animal. And so we went to make give the gift to the ranch owner, and his kids were there. And the kid said, "Hey, Dad, what are you going to do with all that money?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to invest it in the ranch, and we're going to get this, and we're going to get that." The kid said, I think we should buy more of those cats because they're worth a whole lot more money than our cats." Way to go. Okay, so anyway, this is the award guidelines. This is what we learned from practice.
Wow, 20,000 pages.
24-hour period, and then sometimes we've got a couple of pictures, and I don't think they're in this presentation, but we had one with a mountain lion and either 4 or 5 of her cubs. She had a bunch of big Afro kittens. So we give this other, we give all kinds of other advice or help or whatever they ask for. This is not the way to build something that is going to withhold erosion, because all of those rocks, every last one of them got washed out. But now we know how to do it upstream of this particular spot, and we put in something called a media luna that stops the half moon that stops the water here, spreads it out over there. It works much better. Oh, and this is, most of these ranches didn't have any outhouses, and people didn't really want to use the outhouses when we first put them up. And this is a whole idea of keeping the arroyos having a more sanitary stream flow. And anyway, so we just built this outhouse, and these are really nicely made outhouses. And the next day, yeah, I think it's a python. What is it?
Mexican boa.
Mexican boa showed up in the hole. So it did not make the outhouse. Then the other thing that we did is we did a whole lot of these exclusion areas, and the grass grew up really great in those exclusion areas. That's something that did not go over with the ranchers. We had to just go right back and take them down, because as soon as the cow, you're not going to keep your hungry cow out of a place where there's plenty of good green grass. Anyhow, see all of those tracks going across the hillside. Most of the reserve looked like this. This was one of our very early pictures. But that is just a really horrifying amount of overgrazing on this land. And that doesn't occur on any of these participating ranches anymore. Okay, so here are some of the things that I love. Some of these comments. This is like, how do you like being in this project? Well, I don't have to go up to the States to look for undocumented work on the pipelines anymore. I mean, that's just the kind of thing you want to hear. The other thing is that they all realized when we got there, there were almost no javelinas. And the ranchers all said, we think that the javelinas caught something from stray dogs, because people will go and turn, instead of shooting a dog they don't want, they'll just turn it loose up there. And it turns out that, and this was after checking with a whole bunch of veterinarians, that javelinas can get feline distemper. And so the javelinas had feline distemper, and their population just totally dropped. Since we don't have any more, we don't have very many stray dogs anymore, the javelina population has really increased, And it turns out that when they have done stomach contents, and we haven't done any of that research because it's invasive and we've got a policy not to do invasive stuff, but other researchers have done it in that same part of Sonora. Jaguars prefer to eat javelina and mountain lions prefer deer. And it totally makes sense because javelinas are, the kill process is completely different. Jaguars will drop off of a rock or out of a tree. They'll grab their prey. They'll crush the skull. Mountain lions can chase stuff and run it down, but javelinas are sluggish. You know, they look like the overweight thugs of the predator world. You know, they walk around with their heads down and their mouths hanging open, and you know, they look like Don Corleone in his old age. Okay, so here's the town of Sahuaripa, which could be another Alamos if people would just fix up their old houses. I mean, it's got that Spanish colonial charm, but it's very run down. And this is something that you get to see now. This is a typical Corriente. See how skinny it is and how rangy looking it is? And that guy can run. I mean, it's not just the skinny cow, it's you know, that's the way the breed looks more. So the other thing that we've done is we do all these educational projects in the schools, and we've gotten, the kids did this, the school children did this, under the direction of Randy Young, who is a friend of somebody who's here in the audience, and Randy was really great at getting the kids involved in all this stuff. This is my favorite one. Look how they made the tree come into the mural. I just love
That's
that.
perfect. Wow.
The trouble is that they don't last very long. You know, the storms are real intense and the thing gets washed off. Anyhow, this is ecological instruction and through games. And then we take them up to the reserve and they set out their own cameras. And we've got them setting out cameras close to town, and they get so excited. You know, they see a bunny and they're all squealing, you know, oh my God, bunny. I'm like, no money for bunnies. And then we do these big annual fiestas and so on. Okay, I'm gonna skip a lot of this stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
the biggest challenge that we've got is the dam wall. And when the B-man was talking about lights, they're turning on the lights. They're turning on the lights all the way from Ajo all the way to east of Douglas. And there are lights on the San Pedro, there are lights everywhere, all along the wall. And said they were gonna, said that wasn't gonna happen, but it has. And this is an old map. Now there are 4 major unfenced areas, and they are they're 2 miles in Arizona on the Arizona-New Mexico border. There are about 30 miles at the south end of the San Rafael Valley, east of Nogales. And then there are some areas out on the Obanam Reservation. And then there's a little piece over there between San Luis and Yuma that still are not fenced. And to my way of thinking, and the ranch where my kids are, where I raised them, is unfenced. And the fencing has not worked. People can get over that fence, and they do all the time. But it is absolutely deadly for wildlife. It's just a complete disaster for wildlife. Okay, so what the Borderlands Linkages project that discovered El Jefe, 200 miles south of the border, has done is try to unite and collaborate between all of the different protected areas in Sonora, and to map the corridors that are really important to protect, because jaguars or mountain lions or bees or whatever can't get from one piece of habitat to another piece of habitat, you get all kinds of biological problems in the species. So these are the protected areas in Sonora, and what we're trying to do is really find out how to protect those through engaging the private landowners along the different corridors in protecting all the different species that we want to have moving around. And the closest one, and if you know any rich people who are interested in investing in Mexico, the closest one is, let's see, it must be right in here at El Aribabi, which is where the Cocospero mission was. If you go to Magdalena, if you go south on the highway to Magdalena and then you take a left and go up into the mountains, you end up on the Rio Cocospero, and the Aribabi Ranch was a hunting ranch. It had cows on it, and it is beautifully watered. And the grandsons, or the great-great-grandsons of the original owners, the Elias family, want to sell portions of it, and they want to sell it to a conservation buyer. So if anybody knows somebody who is interested in conservation ranching on a drop-dead beautiful piece of property with huge cottonwood trees and oaks in the higher elevations, it's been beautifully taken care of, and it has got lots and lots of wildlife on it, and it's easy to get to. If it doesn't have beaver, they could easily be reintroduced. It's pretty far away from where the beavers are in Sonora. They're over by Los Fresnos, and so this is quite a way. This is quite a way east, but it definitely is a place that could have beavers. These are the existing corridors that we know of at this time, and this is just a broad map, but Wildlands Network is really trying to do some very subtle mapping of these corridors. Okay, what time is it getting to be?
3:38.
What?
3:38.
Oh, okay, we've got some time. Okay, so this is a timeline of, this is a very gross timeline of the subtleties of legislation related to wildlife in Arizona. The thing that was so significant in the early period was the market hunting. And there are lots of photographs. The Arizona Historical Society has got great photographs of the market hunting period. Tombstone, when it was the only kind of like significant town in this very southern end of Arizona, had several different butcher shops. It had a bunch of butcher shops, and most of the stuff that they were butchering was deer, sheep, elk. It was not beef cattle. In any case, elk. Did you know that there are elk in Hidalgo County, New Mexico? And I think there were some elk. Okay, so Jaguar sightings. The first photograph of a live jaguar was taken in 1996. And since that, there have been all of these different jaguars that have been well documented in this area. And it was interesting because in 96, Warner Glenn, who lives east of Douglas, and Jack Chiles both got photographs of different jaguars alive in mountain ranges. So that was pretty exciting. And then this Macho A is a questionable jaguar, but nobody's really sure whether it was a bad picture of Macho B or whether it was a completely different jaguar. So I'm going to show you pictures of each of these guys as we go along. Okay, this is 96 in the Palancios. And in that event, Warner Glenn is a rancher who is also a paid hunting guide. And he could tell from the way his hounds were baying that it was not a mountain lion that they were after. And he wasn't sure what it was, but they had a completely different way of baying because they were so excited. And since then, he said that he thinks that he may have encountered another jaguar because of the way the hounds were baying and because they wouldn't approach the place where it was. So what happened was he had about 6 hounds that got really ripped up by this particular jaguar, and he had to have them sewn up. They all survived, but they did get damaged, but not killed. Anyway, the next time, let's see, the whetstones, okay, we don't have a picture of the one I wanted to tell you about. Anyhow, this one turned out to be El Jefe. And this one turned out to be Sombra, the one who is in the Chiricahuas right now. And this guy goes back and forth between the Chiricahuas and the Dos Cabezas. And here we've got Macho B, who was illegally trapped in a leg hold trap. And this one here is El Jefe. He's the dude that showed up down in central Mexico. And this one over here is Yohoko. And Yohoko was named by the kids in the Valencia school. There's a lot of Yaqui children who go to that school. And Yohoko means something in the Yaqui language. I don't know what it means, but they were the ones who chose the name. So Yohoko was killed in Mexico shortly after that. And there's an interesting story with Yohoko because the part of Fort Huachuca is so beautifully preserved. I mean, it's just, it's wonderful. It's a bird up there, and we see all kinds of wildlife. So the Boy Scouts were helping the Arizona Game and Fish with the camera traps. And the Boy Scouts got so excited about seeing this jaguar that they told the newspapers in Sierra Vista, which the Game and Fish did not want to have happen because then you get a lot of yahoos going out and saying, oh, I hear there's a jaguar up this canyon, I want to go see it. And that's not what anybody wants to have happen. But anyway, it was a wonderful story that the Boy Scouts were so involved and so excited by finding this kind of wildlife that they spilled the beans. Okay, so what Warner Glenn did after he found this first jaguar was he wrote a book about the experience and about his past life hunting. And he had hunted with the Lee brothers when he was a little kid, and his dad Marvin was like a famous lion hunter. And so like there's this whole, you know, the Hook and Bullet group are really wonderful conservationists most of the time. And so this was something that really appealed. As soon as he realized that it wasn't a mountain lion, he went, put his gun away and got his camera out, and he took a bunch of pictures of that particular deer. Anyway, this is the book that he published, and the money from the sale of that book goes to Jaguar conservation. I just put that's a mountain lion, and that's one of Warner's hounds, and you can just see how that's right at the top of the Palancios, right on the Arizona-New Mexico border, and you can see how rough that country is. Okay, this is Jack Chiles. He's another hunter who's also a conservationist, and he published this little kind of guide to tracking predators. Okay, here's the second jaguar that Warner ran into, and Warner is now 86 years old, and he just got thrown off a mule because he was carrying a big thing of cement and it made too much noise, and the mule got freaked out. Anyway, he's been in the hospital the last few days in Tucson. But what happened with this jaguar is it was sitting under one of these big old juniper trees. It was sitting under this huge juniper tree. It was just kind of cuddled up in there. And his daughter Kelly, who is also a hunting guide, was coming down the slope of a hillside, and she could see the whole thing. She wasn't there for it. Anyway, Warner called off all of his hounds, and they obeyed this time. They didn't chouse the jaguar at all. And they were there for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then the jaguar just got up and walked around that big rock that you see in the photograph, and he sauntered off slowly across the border into Mexico. Totally undisturbed by this whole event. It was pretty amazing. Okay, so this is Macho B, and Macho B was photographed for like, I don't know, 15 years. There were so many photographs taken of him, and he was illegally caught in a lake home trap. I'm going to skip that. Oh, actually, and you can see how swollen that foot is.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody who puts out those traps ought to go to jail. I just think it's so
hands chopped off.
Anyhow, he was released from this, and they put a tracking collar on him, and they followed his movements, and he was down there south of Ruby, Arizona, which is like east of, in the Tumacacori Highlands, east of Nogales. And he wandered around for a couple of weeks, and then the tracking collar got this like irregular heartbeat on it. And so they went with a helicopter and darted him with something to make him go to sleep, and picked him up and took him to the Phoenix Zoo, which has a very, very sophisticated, veterinary care facility. And he was just in such bad shape that they euthanized him. Anyway, that's the bad story. Okay. The Border King, and I tried to put this in chronological order instead of, so that was the story that I already told you. Okay, El Jefe. Critical habitat interspersed in this whole period, and that was really great. It was a result of a lawsuit, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife has dedicated almost 800,000 acres to critical habitat for jaguars. And this dog has now retired, Mike. But he is just a jaguar. He knows the difference between mountain lion scat and jaguar scat. And so he goes out, and the scat dogs are incredibly useful research tools. And Mike was a really great dog. Okay, so here's El Jefe in the Santa Rita Mountains. A member of the Fenn family, which is also a hunting family from Pomerine, was the one who first ran into this guy who was out hunting mountain lions with his 50-year-old daughter, which had to be a real exciting experience for her. Okay. 7 years later, here he is, and we didn't have a circle on this, but look at this little cluster of rosettes over here. I mean, this one's really weird. This one's kind of has a different shape. And from that cluster right there, it's real clear that same guy. I think he looks like he's hit the middle-age spread, don't you think? Okay, so in any case, I put this other thing in because there's been this big discussion about reestablishing a breeding population of jaguars in the United States, and that has really occurred through all of these different finds that we've had. And it blew me away. I was talking to one of our viviendo ranchers who's one of the ones who's a real conservationist. I mean, he really cares about not overgrazing. He said, why don't you guys just come and pick, we've got a lot of females down here. Why don't you just come down here and take one of these females and take it back to Cochise County? And I said, well, that's a nice idea, but we would have a lot of political hoops to go through before that happened. Anyway, this is what happened to Yohoko, who was named by the kids over at the Yaki school. And I think that what happened, and it was very close to that ranch that I was telling you about, El Ari Bobby, that is for sale, so you know anybody. Anyway, it might have a Jaguar on it still. I think what happened was that one of the ranchers down there was having problems with a mountain lion, and they did set out a trap. So you catch a Jaguar, you don't want to kill it, it's in a trap, it's hurting, it's angry. I mean, I think that this was an unintended, it would be the equivalent of manslaughter. I don't think this rancher intended to kill this. And you can clearly see that this was no professional job from the way this pelt's been taken. I mean, this is a real mess, you know, no professional hunter would allow something like that to happen to a legal Jaguar pelt, which I don't believe exists anymore. Okay, so Sombra, and this is a really important story of the U.S. Borderlands Jaguars. Sombra is now moving back and forth between the Dos Cabezas and the Chiricahuas, and there is like a frenzy of people who want to put out motion trigger cameras to find this guy. And you know, my attitude is these critters need their privacy. Leave them alone, folks, you know, but everybody just say, oh, I just really would be so wonderful to get a photograph of him. Anyway, he's down there, and the Forest Service in Douglas is interested in opening up John Long Canyon and putting in a new road into John Long Canyon, which is one of the most beautiful, pristine, isolated canyons in all of the Chiricahuas. And if anybody has any influence with the Forest Service and wants to write letters, what needs to be done is Canyon campground has been left completely desolate. They've even broken the wonderful concrete picnic tables with concrete benches that you know are supposed to last forever. Anyhow, everything's been smashed up. Rucker Creek has not been cleaned up there. The Rucker Lake was never restored after the big floods following the rattlesnake fire. And really useful letters could go to the Douglas Ranger District saying, restore Rucker. Every high school graduation class, all my kids, all my nephews and nieces, everybody went for their high school picnic after graduation to Rucker, and God knows what they did up there. Anyway, that needs to be put back into operation because it's a beautiful place, it's easy access, it has paved roads that go to it, and it's a wonderful recreational site. And what we're really hoping is that Rucker will get restored, maybe not the lake, but definitely the campground, and that John Long, which is a habitat that needs to be protected completely, will be left alone instead of having that road go in.
Donna, what is the purpose of the road? To provide recreation?
No, there's a ranch up there.
Oh.
There's a ranch up there, and the rancher is in his late 80s, and he is a real conservation rancher, and he really cares about his property. And the last time I went up there, we drove in, we saw a flock of like 25 turkeys, and then we drove a little farther, and there were a half dozen deer, and then we went a little farther, and there were a bunch of javelinas. I mean, and that was like a 10-minute drive up to the ranch. I mean, that's how much wildlife there is there. And what we don't need is a bunch of hunters going. You know, if somebody is a dedicated hunter enough to go on a horse and pack out the meat and are do their butchering and bring it out in a backpack, then that's something else. But for car hunters to go, I don't think it should happen. Excuse me for giving all these opinions. Okay, now this is the end. Benito and Valerio are in Mexico on a reserve called Cuenca de los Ojos, which is a combination of 9 different ranches that were purchased and put together by the Austins during the past 30 years. And they go all the way from east of Agua Prieta to the Chihuahuan border. And those ranches have been turned over to a Mexican foundation that is conserving them, and they do have some cattle on different parts of them. And it goes in elevation from, let's see, Douglas Agua Prieta is about 4,000 feet, and it must go up to 6,500 or 7,000 feet. The San Luis Pass in the San Luis Mountains that has the big highway on Route 2 that goes over to Chihuahua is part of this reserve. And the U of A has got money from Homeland Security, from that big funding that they did when the wall went in, to do habitat restoration. And so they've been funding the project at the U of A to identify jaguars. And so there is a graduate student who has photographed 2 different young male jaguars within 3 miles of the New Mexico Chihuahua border and within 3 miles of the Arizona Sonora border. And they are just waiting to come across. Anyway, this is Bonito, and this is Valerio, which is a pretty spectacular
How much did you pay for that one?
You don't have to pay those motion trigger cameras, they just hang right there and do their work. Okay, so anyway, since this all has been photographed and documented so well, there is a whole lot of discussion about reintroduction of jaguars. And it is entirely possible to do that kind of thing. I have a South African sister-in-law, and so I got to go to South Africa. And they go in, it's really, to me, it's kind of horrifying, but they go in and they pick up rhinoceroses and they move them from one reserve to another reserve, hanging off of a helicopter. And they move stuff around all the time. I mean, a jaguar would be a piece of cake compared to a rhinoceros. So anyway, a big paper was published that really discusses this quite seriously, and it's entirely possible to do. Anyway, this is what I love to see. This was Libelula, which I think means dragonfly. She is in hot pursuit of this dude who was the macho guy, and we actually did get a picture of them mating. But it's a video, and my computer won't do it. Anyway, these are all the sightings in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And I just want to, I think you all know about how much the wall is a real obstacle for wildlife. This is what they did just east of Douglas, and this is typical. A lot of the damage from walling is really not the wall itself, it's what happens to all of the land surrounding the wall on both sides.
Is the United States on the right side?
The United States is on the right side.
The wrong side.
And these are lights, and this is over by San Diego. And our lights aren't going to be nearly that bad when they go on, but any lights are not good to shoot them out. I mean, the bees, the moths, everything. The bats, the birds, I mean, everything gets hurt by it. That was taken by the Border Patrol in Naco. And the Naco Border Patrol have been really great. I mean, they really care about wildlife. And this is also in Naco, the one with the deer. They also got a female mountain lion on top of that wall that's just to the east of the border crossing in Naco. And what they thought, because she was so desperate, they thought that she had a cub that had gone, and this is the 18-foot wall, this wasn't the new wall. This was the older 18-foot wall that had a bigger space between the bollards. And they thought that her cub went through the bollards and she couldn't get to the other side. I should put that in this. That's a pretty dramatic picture. Okay, that's the San Pedro. I'm sure that a lot of you have been there. And the interesting thing is that Eastern Cochise County is in the Rio Yaqui watershed. That means everything off of the Palancios and the Pajaritos, whatever those little mountains are east of Douglas, that all flows south. Okay, these gates cannot open into Mexico. The gates can't open south. So that means that the gates open north against the flow. And when we have a big summer monsoon rain that brings down, you know, all kinds of boulders and cottonwood limbs and, you know, great huge hunks of people's old houses and stuff, it all gets hung up because the gates are opening in the wrong direction. So anyway, that's part of the border wall construction that is really not something that we're proud of. Okay, and Route 2 in Mexico parallels. Route 2 is the major connection between Baja California and Chihuahua. And it is now being converted from, when I first moved down there in 1972, it was dirt. And we had all kinds of turkeys and deer and, you know, all kinds of, our ranch is right on the border. We had all kinds of animals coming across, no more. You can hear the trucks changing gear, you can hear the jake brakes going on, and you know, it's a really noisy highway. And right now it is 2 lanes and sometimes it's 3 lanes at crossing points. And it doesn't, anyway, it's being converted into a divided highway. Between 80 and 90% of the traffic on that road is trucks, because it's commercial. And there's no towns out there, and there's no reason that people in cars would be driving it. So it really is a huge truck route, and it's very, very dangerous. So what we're very anxious to see happen is that we get wildlife bridges, and mainly that we get the culverts. And I don't have the picture that I really wanted to have in this talk, which is one of the old culverts that the Mexican Highway Department used to put in. And you know how Spanish colonial architecture gets carried over into the modern years? There's a stone with a keystone at the top of it, beautiful stone masonry culvert that would be something that you would want to see in a, you know, in Alamos or Cuernavaca or, you know, one of the tourist cities. And that was what the government was putting in. And it's wide enough for a couple of animals to go through, and it's tall enough for a deer with a big rack on to get through. So if we could get Mexican Highway Department, which is federal, that's a federal road, but they have an agency in Hermosillo. And if we could get them to make some beautiful, architecturally, you know, exciting culverts, every place where there is a water crossing is where the animals go. And and so there's already some kind of a culvert there, but it could be a architectural exhibit that would give great pride to the engineers who are doing it, and it would save all kinds of lives, because on that road they're just, you know, you see dead deer, you see dead coyotes mostly. Anyway, I just wanted to end with a couple of fun pictures. This is the Elmwood Park Zoo outside of Philadelphia, And they came to the Jaguar Reserve and they took photographs of the landscape, and then they painted this whole reserve, this whole exhibit with the Jaguars in it. And they didn't know they had a maternity ward for Jaguars in Philadelphia. And then they didn't know that they had a pregnant Jaguar, and she produced these two guys. So that was really a nice story. And this, I think, is true, but to me, it's so amazing. A friend of mine who works for Jones Photo in Tucson found this. And he was going through some archives that Jones Photo has. This guy was a real dentist in Nogales, Sonora. And he had Happy the German Shepherd and Carlos the Jaguar. And there's another picture of him. He's got this big 1950s, it's like a Buick Roadmaster or something, convertible. It's drop dead gorgeous old car. And he drove around with this Jaguar in the back seat of his convertible. And he went to Los Angeles, and supposedly this was I think it's stamped on the back. The LA Times photographer took this photograph. And the Jaguar was his pet, got along with the dog, and you can see that he's got the middle age spread already, or else Dr. Cicero gave him too much food. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to all of this. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to stick around and answer questions.
Incredible conservation work, Diana.
Yeah.
Well, it's really fun.
Wish I'd won the lottery, I have some money to invest.
That's right, 1.28 billion. That's
Really excited what happened. Oh, really? Isn't it?